I'm Maya, 32 years old, and my story begins in the vibrant heart of Atlanta, Georgia. For as long as I can remember, I've been driven by a deep desire for justice and equity. This passion led me to a career in public service, specifically within the city's Department of Housing and Urban Development. I joined the department with an immense sense of purpose, believing wholeheartedly in its mission. Our stated goal was to ensure fair housing and equitable urban development for all residents. I saw it as a direct pathway to making a tangible difference in people's lives, especially in communities that had historically been marginalized. My role as a Senior Policy Analyst was demanding, but I thrived on the challenge. I was responsible for reviewing existing policies, analyzing their impact, and proposing improvements. It was a position that required meticulous attention to detail and a strong commitment to ethical governance, qualities I prided myself on possessing. From my very first day, I was eager to immerse myself in the work. I spent countless hours poring over data, policy documents, and community reports. The statistics revealed stark disparities, but I initially attributed them to historical factors and complex socioeconomic issues, rather than current systemic failings. My colleagues seemed dedicated, and the atmosphere was generally professional. I admired the commitment of many individuals around me. There was a shared sense of working towards a greater good, which reinforced my initial optimism about my chosen path and the impact I could have. My direct supervisor was Mr. Harrison, a seasoned veteran in the department. He was a white man in his late 50s, well respected within the city administration. He had a reputation for being firm but fair, and I initially felt fortunate to be working under his guidance and mentorship. He often spoke of the department's commitment to diversity and inclusion. These were words I took at face value, believing they reflected the true ethos of our work. I genuinely thought we were all striving towards the same progressive goals, making Atlanta a fairer place for everyone. However, as weeks turned into months, I started noticing subtle inconsistencies. Certain policy recommendations, particularly those affecting predominantly Black neighborhoods, seemed to face more bureaucratic hurdles. They were often delayed or watered down in ways that didn't quite make sense. I observed how funding allocations for community projects sometimes disproportionately favored areas with higher property values. These patterns were not immediately obvious to an outsider, but my deep dive into the data began to reveal a quiet, underlying current. It was a disquieting feeling. There were also moments in meetings where community concerns from minority groups seemed to be dismissed or reinterpreted. The language used was always polite, but the outcomes often felt dismissive. It was as if their voices were heard, but not truly listened to or acted upon. I tried to rationalize these observations, telling myself that large systems are inherently slow and complex. Change takes time, and perhaps I was just being overly critical. I wanted to believe that any disparities were unintentional, mere oversights in a vast bureaucratic machine. My idealism was still strong, pushing me to find solutions within the existing framework. I believed that if I could just present the data clearly enough and propose logical, evidence-based policy adjustments, the system would naturally correct itself. I had faith in the process. I started taking more detailed notes during meetings and cross-referencing data points. It was an unconscious habit at first, a way to better understand the complexities of our operations. I wanted to ensure my own proposals were as robust and well-supported as possible. These early observations were like faint whispers in the background, not yet a clear alarm. I was still focused on my primary duties, diligently working to improve our policies. I saw myself as a positive force for change from within, a reformer committed to the department's stated ideals. Little did I know, these seemingly minor discrepancies were threads of a much larger tapestry. They were the initial signs of a systemic issue that would soon challenge my deepest beliefs. My journey was just beginning, moving from subtle observation to undeniable truth. The whispers I had initially dismissed began to grow louder, evolving into a discernible hum of concern. My analytical mind, trained to identify trends and anomalies, couldn't ignore the recurring patterns any longer. It was becoming increasingly clear that the disparities weren't accidental. I started focusing my research specifically on the allocation of housing grants and urban development initiatives. My goal was to understand why certain communities consistently received less funding or faced more obstacles in accessing resources. The numbers began to tell a story that was deeply troubling. For instance, I discovered that applications from neighborhoods with a majority Black population were disproportionately flagged for incomplete documentation. This often led to delays or outright rejections, even when the issue seemed minor and easily rectifiable. It was a subtle but effective barrier. Conversely, similar applications from more affluent, predominantly white areas seemed to move through the process with remarkable speed and fewer bureaucratic hurdles. The contrast was stark and undeniable, revealing a double standard that was quietly embedded in the system's operations. I began to compile a comprehensive report, meticulously documenting every instance of what appeared to be biased processing. I included timelines, application statuses, and the specific reasons for rejection or delay. My work became less about policy improvement and more about forensic investigation. My colleagues, engrossed in their own tasks, didn't seem to notice my shift in focus. I worked quietly, often staying late, driven by a growing sense of urgency. The data was no longer just numbers. It represented real families and communities being systematically disadvantaged. I also noticed a pattern in the language used by some senior staff when discussing these communities. While never overtly racist, there were subtle undertones of skepticism or dismissiveness. Phrases like, "those areas are always problematic," or "they just don't understand the process" became common. Mr. Harrison, my supervisor, would often nod along to these comments, occasionally adding a generalized statement about personal responsibility. His reactions, or lack thereof, started to chip away at my initial respect for his leadership and fairness. I began to see a different side to him. One particular case stood out. A community center in a historically Black neighborhood desperately needed funding for vital repairs. Their application was repeatedly stalled due to minor technicalities. Meanwhile, a new park project in a wealthier district sailed through with minimal scrutiny. I brought this specific case to Mr. Harrison, hoping he would intervene. I presented the clear discrepancies, expecting him to share my concern. Instead, he simply advised me to stick to the bigger picture and not get bogged down in individual cases. His response felt dismissive. His reluctance to address the issue directly fueled my determination. It solidified my suspicion that these were not isolated incidents but rather symptoms of a deeper systemic issue. My idealism was slowly being replaced by a steely resolve to uncover the full truth. I started cross-referencing our internal data with external demographic information and historical zoning maps. This allowed me to see how current policies perpetuated historical inequalities, effectively redlining communities through bureaucratic means rather than explicit laws. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. The system was not broken. It was, in many ways, functioning exactly as it was designed to, maintaining existing power structures and inequalities under the guise of neutral policy. It was a chilling realization. I knew that simply presenting data wouldn't be enough. I needed to build an irrefutable case, one that connected the dots between policy, practice, and discriminatory outcomes. This required not just numbers, but narratives, and a deep understanding of the mechanisms at play. My report was no longer just an internal document. It was becoming a comprehensive exposé. I felt a profound responsibility to bring this truth to light, no matter the personal cost. The hum of concern had become a roar, demanding action. With my comprehensive report finally complete, I felt a mix of trepidation and resolve. The document, meticulously compiled over months, laid bare the systemic racial biases embedded within the department's operations. It was a damning indictment, backed by irrefutable data and specific case studies. I scheduled a private meeting with Mr. Harrison, believing that presenting the evidence directly would compel him to act. I still harbored a faint hope that he was simply unaware of the full extent of the problem, and that once informed, he would be an ally in rectifying it. The meeting began cordially enough. I started by outlining my findings, maintaining a professional and objective tone. I presented the statistics, the policy analysis, and the documented discrepancies in funding and application processing. I watched his expression carefully for any sign of understanding. As I continued, Mr. Harrison's initial polite demeanor began to shift. His smile tightened and his eyes narrowed. He interrupted me several times, attempting to dismiss the data as anomalies or misinterpretations. He suggested I was overthinking things, or perhaps too sensitive. "Maya," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I appreciate your diligence, but you're seeing ghosts where there are none. Our department operates with the highest standards of fairness. These are complex issues, not simple cases of bias." His tone was condescending. I pushed back, calmly presenting more evidence, citing specific policy clauses and their disproportionate impact. I explained how seemingly neutral criteria inadvertently created barriers for minority communities. I refused to let him dismiss the facts. His dismissiveness quickly escalated into thinly veiled anger. "Are you suggesting," he asked, his voice low and strained, "that I or this department are intentionally discriminatory? That's a very serious accusation, Maya, and one you should be careful making." I reiterated that my report was based on data, not personal accusations. "The data points to systemic bias, Mr. Harrison," I stated firmly. "Whether intentional or not, the outcomes are discriminatory, and we have a responsibility to address them." He stood up, pacing his office. "This report is disruptive, Maya. It undermines confidence in our work. It's based on a flawed premise and a clear misunderstanding of how government operates. You're stirring up trouble where there doesn't need to be any." He then suggested that my perspective might be clouding my judgment. It was a subtle but clear attempt to invalidate my findings by questioning my objectivity, implying that my own background made me incapable of impartial analysis. "Perhaps this role isn't the right fit for you, Maya," he continued, his voice now cold and precise. "Your focus seems to have shifted from policy analysis to advocacy. That's not what we hired you for." The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken threats. I refused to back down. "My advocacy is for equitable policy, Mr. Harrison, which is precisely what my role entails. Ignoring these biases would be a dereliction of duty." My voice remained steady, despite the tremor in my hands. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression devoid of warmth. "Effective immediately, Maya, your services are no longer required. We're restructuring, and your position is being eliminated." The words hit me with a chilling finality. I felt a surge of shock, then a wave of profound disappointment. I had expected resistance, but not outright dismissal. It was a stark confirmation that the system wasn't interested in self-correction, but rather in preserving the status quo. "This is retaliation, Mr. Harrison," I stated, my voice now laced with a quiet anger. "You're firing me because I uncovered the truth about racial bias." He merely shrugged, his face a mask of indifference. "That's a matter of opinion, Maya. The department has the right to make staffing decisions. Your final paycheck and severance details will be mailed to you." He gestured towards the door, signaling the end of our conversation and my career there. I walked out of his office, my report clutched in my hand, the weight of it feeling heavier than ever. My idealism had been shattered, but in its place, a new, unyielding determination had begun to form. This was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a different fight. The immediate aftermath of my dismissal was a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal washed over me. I had poured my heart and soul into that department, believing I was working for positive change, only to be cast aside for daring to speak the truth. Leaving the building that day, I felt a profound emptiness. My professional identity, which had been so intertwined with my mission, was suddenly severed. The city that I loved and had hoped to serve now felt like a place where truth was unwelcome, especially when it challenged power. I spent the first few days in a haze, replaying the conversation with Mr. Harrison over and over again. His cold dismissal, his refusal to even consider the evidence, confirmed my worst fears. The bias was not just systemic, it was actively protected by those in power. My family and close friends were a crucial lifeline during this period. They listened patiently, offering comfort and unwavering support. Their belief in me, and in the validity of my findings, helped to counteract the self-doubt that occasionally crept in. "This isn't about you, Maya," my mother told me gently. "It's about them. You did the right thing, and that's what matters." Her words resonated deeply, reminding me that my integrity was far more valuable than any job. Despite the emotional turmoil, a quiet resolve began to solidify within me. I still had the report, the meticulously gathered evidence. This wasn't just my story. It was the story of countless communities in Atlanta whose voices had been ignored and whose opportunities had been denied. I knew I couldn't let it end there. The injustice was too great, the implications too significant. My dismissal, while painful, had also freed me from the constraints of internal bureaucracy. I was no longer bound by their rules or their fear of transparency. My first practical step was to seek legal counsel. I needed to understand my rights and options. I contacted a civil rights attorney specializing in employment discrimination, recommended by a former law school classmate. This was a crucial step in formalizing my next move. The attorney, Ms. Davies, listened intently as I recounted my experience and presented my report. She confirmed that I likely had a strong case for wrongful termination and retaliation. More importantly, she saw the broader implications of my findings. "This isn't just about your job, Maya," she affirmed. "This is about accountability for systemic bias. Your report could be a powerful tool, not just for you, but for the community." Her words ignited a new spark of hope within me. We discussed the potential challenges, the city's resources, the difficulty of proving intent, and the inevitable backlash. Ms. Davies was realistic, but also confident in the strength of my evidence. She believed we could make a difference. I also began reaching out to community organizers and advocacy groups in Atlanta. I knew that my data, while compelling, would be even more powerful when combined with lived experiences and grassroots support. This was about collective action, not just individual vindication. Connecting with these groups, I heard stories that mirrored my findings, stories of families struggling to access housing, of neighborhoods being overlooked for development. Their experiences validated my data and strengthened my resolve to fight. This period of reassessment was transformative. It shifted my focus from personal grievance to a broader mission. My dismissal, intended to silence me, had instead amplified my voice and clarified my purpose. I was no longer an analyst, I was a truth-teller. The pain of being sacked was still present, but it was now overshadowed by a burning desire for justice. I realized that my most impactful work might not be from within the system, but from challenging it from the outside. My fight was just beginning. My resolve hardened into a strategic plan. I understood that to truly expose the racial bias and hold the department accountable, I needed to build an irrefutable counter-narrative. This meant not only presenting my data, but also amplifying the voices of those directly affected by these discriminatory policies. I began by refining my report, transforming it from an internal document into a compelling public exposé. Ms. Davies advised me on how to present the information clearly and concisely, ensuring it was accessible to a broader audience while maintaining its factual integrity. Simultaneously, I started connecting more deeply with community leaders and residents in the affected neighborhoods. I attended town hall meetings, listened to personal testimonies, and gathered first-hand accounts of the challenges they faced due to the department's biased practices. These personal stories added a vital human element to my data. They transformed abstract statistics into tangible impacts on real lives, making the systemic bias undeniable. The pain and frustration in their voices fueled my determination even further. One powerful ally emerged in Ms. Evelyn Reed, a respected elder and longtime community advocate. She had witnessed decades of discriminatory practices and immediately recognized the patterns I had identified. Her wisdom and network were invaluable resources. "Child, what you found, we've lived," Ms. Reed told me, her eyes filled with both weariness and hope. "It's time someone put it all on paper so the world can see." Her encouragement gave me immense strength and validation. Together, we organized small, private meetings with other community leaders, local journalists who were known for their integrity, and even a few sympathetic city council members. We shared my findings and discussed the most effective ways to bring this information to light. I learned the importance of strategic communication, of framing the narrative in a way that resonated with different audiences. It wasn't just about presenting facts. It was about telling a story of injustice and the urgent need for change. My legal team, led by Ms. Davies, worked tirelessly on the employment discrimination case, but we also recognized the power of public pressure. A legal battle alone might not achieve the systemic change we sought. Public awareness was crucial. We decided to launch a multi-pronged approach: a formal legal complaint, a detailed public report, and a coordinated media outreach campaign. This would ensure that the department couldn't simply sweep my findings under the rug. I spent countless hours preparing for interviews, practicing how to articulate complex policy issues in an understandable way. I knew that my credibility would be attacked, and I needed to be ready to defend my work and my integrity. The support from Ms. Reed and the community groups was incredible. They helped me organize press conferences, connect with local media outlets, and mobilize residents for public demonstrations. This was no longer just my fight, it was a collective movement. We meticulously planned the timing of our public unveiling, aiming for maximum impact. We wanted to ensure that once the information was out, it couldn't be easily dismissed or ignored by the city administration or the public. This period was exhausting, but also incredibly empowering. I was no longer a lone analyst. I was part of a powerful coalition. Every step we took, every connection we made, was a brick in the foundation of our counter-narrative. I felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing that I was fighting for something much larger than myself. The pain of my dismissal had transformed into a catalyst for meaningful action, building momentum towards a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the department. The day of the public unveiling arrived, charged with a palpable tension and excitement. We had chosen a small community center in one of the most affected neighborhoods as our venue, a symbolic choice that underscored the human impact of the department's policies. Local news cameras were already set up, and a crowd of community members, activists, and concerned citizens filled the room. Ms. Reed stood beside me, her presence a beacon of strength and solidarity. This was the moment we had meticulously planned for. I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "My name is Maya," I began, looking directly into the cameras and at the faces in the crowd. "And today, I'm here to share the truth about systemic racial bias within Atlanta's Department of Housing and Urban Development." I then systematically presented the findings of my report, using clear language and compelling visuals. I showed the data, the charts illustrating the disparities in grant allocations, and the timelines of stalled applications from minority communities. I shared specific examples, like the community center's delayed funding, juxtaposed with the swift approval of projects in wealthier districts. I explained how seemingly neutral policies created a discriminatory impact, perpetuating historical inequalities. "This isn't about isolated incidents," I stated, my voice gaining strength. "This is about a pattern of behavior, a system that, whether by design or neglect, consistently disadvantages our Black residents. It's time for accountability." Then, Ms. Reed spoke, her voice resonating with decades of lived experience. She shared powerful testimonies from community members, putting human faces to the statistics. Her words added an emotional weight that no data point could convey alone. The local journalists pressed for answers, and I calmly addressed their questions, providing detailed responses and additional evidence. I was prepared for the scrutiny, ready to defend every claim with facts and figures. As the press conference concluded, the story immediately began to spread. Local news channels ran segments, and articles appeared online. The hashtag Atlanta Housing Bias started trending on social media, amplifying our message far beyond the room. The department's initial response was predictable: denial and deflection. Mr. Harrison issued a statement calling my claims unsubstantiated and the disgruntled accusations of a former employee. He attempted to discredit me personally, but his attempts to dismiss my findings only fueled the public's interest. The detailed evidence in my report, combined with the powerful community testimonies, made it difficult for the department to simply brush it aside. The public outcry was immediate and intense. City council members began receiving calls and emails from concerned constituents. Local advocacy groups organized protests outside the department's offices, demanding an independent investigation. Mr. Harrison, who had been so dismissive in my office, was now visibly flustered during public appearances. He stumbled over answers, his usual confident demeanor replaced by defensiveness. His attempts to control the narrative were failing. This was the "he lost it when I" moment. My public unveiling of the truth had completely disrupted his carefully constructed facade of impartiality and competence. He was losing control of the narrative, and the pressure was mounting. The story gained traction, picked up by larger regional and even national news outlets. The spotlight was now firmly on Atlanta's Department of Housing and Urban Development, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable truths I had revealed. I knew the battle was far from over, but we had achieved a critical victory. We had brought the hidden biases into the light. The conversation had shifted, and the demand for justice was now too loud to ignore. The public unveiling ignited a fierce battle. The department, under immense pressure, launched a full-scale counteroffensive. Their strategy was clear: discredit me, downplay the findings, and protect the established order at all costs. Mr. Harrison, now visibly agitated, appeared on local news, reiterating his claims that my report was baseless and motivated by personal vendetta. He tried to paint me as an unstable and unreliable former employee seeking revenge. His legal team, far more resourced than mine, attempted to intimidate me with threats of defamation lawsuits. They sent cease and desist letters, demanding I retract my statements and remove the report from public view. However, Ms. Davies and her team were prepared. They swiftly countered every legal threat, reminding the department that truth is an absolute defense. We stood firm, refusing to be silenced or intimidated by their tactics. The city administration, initially hesitant, was now forced to respond to the growing public outcry. The mayor's office announced an internal review, a move that many, including myself, viewed with skepticism, fearing it would be a whitewash. But the community's resolve was unwavering. Ms. Reed and other activists organized daily protests outside the department, chanting slogans and holding signs demanding accountability. Their persistence kept the issue in the public eye. Social media remained a powerful tool, with countless individuals sharing their own experiences of housing discrimination in Atlanta. The collective narrative grew stronger, making it impossible for the department to dismiss my findings as isolated incidents. During this period, I faced intense personal scrutiny. My background, my motivations, and even my past professional conduct were scrutinized by the department's PR machine. It was an exhausting and emotionally draining experience. Yet, every attack only strengthened my resolve. I knew I was fighting for something bigger than myself, and the support from the community, from Ms. Reed, and from my legal team kept me grounded and focused. My employment discrimination lawsuit against the department proceeded, gaining significant public attention. During depositions, Mr. Harrison's testimony often contradicted earlier statements, and his attempts to deny the obvious biases became increasingly transparent. The internal review, despite its initial skepticism, began to yield some uncomfortable truths for the department. The overwhelming evidence I had presented, coupled with the relentless public pressure, made a complete cover-up impossible. Key findings from my report were reluctantly acknowledged, albeit framed as areas for improvement, rather than systemic discrimination. It was a small victory, but a crack in their facade of infallibility. The pressure mounted on Mr. Harrison. His credibility was severely damaged, both within the department and in the public eye. His leadership was questioned, and whispers of his impending departure began to circulate. The battle was arduous, marked by setbacks and moments of despair. But the collective effort, the unwavering commitment of the community, and the undeniable truth of the data kept us moving forward, inch by painful inch. I learned that justice is rarely swift or easy, especially when challenging entrenched power. But I also learned the immense power of resilience, of speaking truth to power, and of a community united in its pursuit of fairness. The culmination of our relentless efforts arrived with a quiet but profound sense of triumph. The city, unable to withstand the sustained public pressure and the mounting legal evidence, finally conceded. It was a victory hard-won, but undeniably impactful. The first major breakthrough came with the announcement of Mr. Harrison's resignation. Citing personal reasons, he stepped down from his position, a clear acknowledgement of the pressure his leadership had been under. It was a significant symbolic victory. Soon after, the department announced a series of sweeping reforms. These included a comprehensive review of all housing grant applications, a new independent oversight committee, and mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. It was a direct response to the issues I had raised. My employment discrimination lawsuit was settled out of court on terms that were highly favorable to me. The settlement not only compensated me fairly, but also included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented the department from disparaging my name or my work. More importantly, The settlement included a provision for a significant endowment to a newly established community fund dedicated to supporting housing initiatives in historically underserved neighborhoods. This was a direct result of my advocacy and Ms. Davies' strategic negotiation. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just for my personal vindication, but for the tangible change we had achieved for the community. The system had been forced to bend, and real resources were now flowing to those who needed them most. My experience, though painful, had transformed me. I no longer sought to work within the confines of a system that resisted change. Instead, I found a new calling: independent advocacy and consulting for systemic equity. I established my own nonprofit organization, Equity Forward Atlanta, dedicated to researching and exposing systemic biases in public institutions. Our mission was to empower communities with data and provide strategic guidance for policy reform. Ms. Evelyn Reed became a key advisor on our board, bringing invaluable community wisdom and historical perspective. We collaborated with other grassroots organizations, building a powerful network for change across the city and beyond. My work now involves speaking at national conferences, advising other cities on anti-bias policy, and training new generations of activists. I was using my analytical skills and my lived experience to drive meaningful, lasting change. The sting of being sacked had faded, replaced by the profound joy of building something truly impactful. My purpose had become clearer, my voice stronger, and my impact far greater than I could have ever achieved within the old system. Atlanta began to see tangible improvements in housing equity. More families received the support they needed, and development projects were initiated with greater community input and fairness. It was a slow process, but the trajectory had shifted. I often reflect on that day in Mr. Harrison's office. His attempt to silence me had, ironically, unleashed my true potential. He had lost it when I exposed the truth, but in doing so, he had inadvertently set me free to fight for a greater cause. My journey taught me that true power lies not in position, but in purpose. It's in the courage to speak truth, even when your voice shakes, and in the unwavering belief that justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail. My new beginning was not just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the resilience of a community and the transformative power of standing up for what is right. The fight for equity continues, but now I lead it on my own terms.